This is the 17th of September. I realized because it's a little different format today, I forgot to say what date it was so that later on when this video appears on YouTube or some of the other playout devices that we have around the globe, you'll know what date the questions took place. The second thing, if you have questions, make sure that you send them to this email address, questions at the letter K-I followed by the word trust, kitrust.org. And then we can get you on air. Also, make sure that you follow us on Twitter and like our Facebook page so that we can know who's watching us and following us and providing us input through those two mediums, Facebook and Twitter. So be sure and do that. Let's go back to another question. This is from Christy.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes?
Can I ask you a question?
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Can you give our listeners a thumbnail sketch of the profile of other listeners? I mean, how many people are listening and what countries do they represent? I'm just curious if there's any visibility of that.
Oh yeah, well I'll get the guys in the control room to answer that question for me, and I'll get back to you as soon as they'll run. When they're on camera to you, they'll bring me in a piece of paper with that in. But we've been experiencing a really good uptick, I think, as people are sharing and liking both of YouTube videos and the things that we're posting on Facebook and following on Twitter. And the more that you begin to help that get out there, the greater the following. So that's exciting. But I'm going to go to this question now from Christy from Oklahoma. She says, if God is outside of time, is it possible that when the Bible speaks about death as sleep, it is a suspension of time, and the next moment that a believer experiences would be the resurrection of the dead in Christ right before the rapture? What are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, first of all, we need to understand that the body and the soul are separate. The body is the physical part, and the body is the one that that feels time. The idea of sleep is a euphemism in the, if nothing else, then a separation for a while of the body and the soul. In that kind of an engagement, it's not surprising to discover that the concept of aging and so forth is tied to the body, not the soul. And so we're going to get totally new bodies. So the whole dimensionality of time is changed, if you will, for the party. So when we use the word asleep to represent people who are departed in that sense, it's a euphemism in language, but it's also sort of a parenthesis in experience. Because I assume that the time would be regained when they have a new body.
Right. All right, I'm going to go to a question from Peter. He's asking with regards to the tabernacle and eventually the temple, and we're dealing with this, with the Jewish traditions with regards to how thick this cloth is, this curtain in the temple. He says, how did the high priest pass from the inner court into the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement, carrying the blood that was to sprinkle on the mercy seat, if in fact, according to tradition, this inner curtain is so huge and so heavy? How did he make it through it? Do you have any idea?
Well, I have no competence here. My Nan and I have had the opportunity to explore a lot of this at the Rockefeller Library in Jerusalem because we were chasing down a number of other issues for one of our books. And so while we've had some exposure to some of the at least belief structures, I have to admit that in all of that I don't have any insight to grant in terms of how they get around a fairly heavy curtain of that kind. That is what I understand it was, fairly substantial. But at the same time, I assume that there's a mechanic to get around it because he had to do it and he had to do it alone.
Yes.
And it's my understanding they even had a rope tied around one leg. So if he died, they could drag him out of there without entering it, and that's a very rabbinical solution to something that would be a serious problem.
Right.
And
right.
So that gets into the legend of Elijah's mantle and all of that with respect to the golden altar and so forth. But all of that happens just outside the Holy of Holies, and the Holy of Holies is defined by the presence of the mercy seat. But the high priest could only enter there once a year after all that ceremonial preparation. But however he did it, I believe he did it alone.
It says, Chuck often says, if God does not judge America, he would have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom and Gomorrah would have only been spared by God if there was only one righteous living there. Following the same logic, is there not one American living in America today who is not righteous before the eyes of the Lord?
Well, there was Ananias and Sapphira were not righteous before the Lord. I don't think they were unsaved, but I think they were taken out of the ball game. So I don't think that there's any guarantee that we'll stay in the ball game. So I think those speculations are defendable speculations, but they're still speculations.
Right.
But clearly, in Lot's case, if you read chapter 19 carefully, you realize the angels had to get him out of there before they could do their job. And so that I think most of us share the speculation that question embraces, and that is that there is a minimum number that God will defer because of that minimum number. But at the same time, the day will come that there's going to be a day where it ends, and so and the more you study that, the more it would seem it's getting closer.
I heard from one of our Koinonia Institute Silver students who said that she did some research on that quote, which we often, when we write about it, give it as credit to Billy Graham. And apparently, according to Billy Graham's own telling, that quote actually comes from his wife, and it comes from a situation where he was writing with regards to the condition of the world, and he asked his wife to read over the bullet points of what he was writing, and she came back in and made this statement to him: wow, if God doesn't judge America, then he'll have to apologize to Sodom and Gomorrah. So actually that comment started with Billy Graham's wife, although we give Billy Graham the credit for it. But it does...
Well, Ruth gets a lot of credit for a number of things. She had a sharp mind. Yes. I remember when she was asked if in their marriage she'd ever considered adultery. She said, absolutely not. But murder, yes.
That's right. So there's behind every good man, there's a good woman.
She had a very quick way, but it wouldn't surprise me. But it's an incredible quote because it really dramatizes something we've got to keep in mind. We study and celebrate, so to speak, the chapter 19 of Genesis without thinking about what is its implication for America today. And I personally have a very dismal or pessimistic outlook. I think America can turn around only if there's repentance, but I see no sign of that at all.
Right.
And so I think that it's a legitimate debate to discuss whether America is even salvageable. And I think only by a miracle of God might it be salvageable, but I can't see why he would be inclined to grant that because of the way we treat him nationally.
Yes.
We outlaw him from the public places. We don't allow him to be discussed in school, and on it goes. The whole list of things is just astonishing and should be a deep embarrassment to any Christian that has any favor for the heritage that we've inherited. Our forefathers, at their own peril, established a future for their posterity at their own cost, and we trample that in the dust of expediency.
Yes.
And it's just anyway, I don't want to start on that. I'll be
that's absolutely right. Here's another question, and this is from Queenstown here in New Zealand. It's from Tiago. You remember Tiago, one of our resident study students? He writes in a question and says, does the Bible say anything about the Ark of the Covenant being in the millennial temple, or is it just the mercy seat itself?
Jeremiah 3:16 indicates that the ark, speaking of the Ark of the Covenant, will no longer be remembered nor come to mind. It's Jeremiah 3:16, an easy reference to remember. Now, the next verse continues the thought by focusing on the throne, the mercy seat, and so from that analysis, I would be surprised to find any reference to the Ark of the Covenant, after the references that we find in 2 Chronicles 35, verse 3 and following, and so on. So I think clearly the focus of Isaiah 18 and some of the other passages are clearly directed to the mercy seat itself, which was solid gold, hammered gold, and so on. So I don't. Now the Ark of the Covenant was a copy of something that Moses was shown in heaven. So I wouldn't be surprised to see it in heaven as such. But that's not the thrust of his question, I think.
Right, right. Okay, I've got a question from Robert from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. But before I get into that, I got a note back from the guys. They say currently sitting watching the live broadcast are people from at least 10 different countries. So, the numbers of actual people viewing each the live session right now is fluctuating up and down. But at least there's a minimum of 10 different countries that are watching the program as we speak. But let's go back to this question from Robert from Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. He says, I've been told that we are entering the next Shemitah and the year of Jubilee. Is this true? And if so, do you think it's significantly prophetically considering current events?
Well, I wish we knew for sure, because the problem is that there's still nothing but rabbinical arguments on two matters. Not only the spacing, but also where to calibrate the grid. What I mean by that is some people regard the Jubilee Year as the 50th year. And I think that they don't recognize that the whole thing is put on a grid of sevens. And it's 49 years plus one. That following year is the Jubilee Year, but it counts as the first of the next sequence, if you will. So that itself is a big rabbinical debate. Different rabbis of different persuasions have different views. Then on top of that, the other bigger problem is calibrating it to when we knew that they actually observed it. Part of the problem is I haven't seen any evidence that impresses me that's been persuasive enough to know that they've actually ever really had a Jubilee Year that we could consider sanctified by the Lord. There's a big debate. Let me turn around the other way. If somebody thinks that a particular year is a Jubilee Year, great. What's the evidence?
Yeah,
What's the evidence? Because there's a lot of opinions, and you know the old story where you have two Jews, you got three opinions.
Right. So
or what they say, if you have two Jews, you got three political parties. But anyway, the point is, in scholarship, there's always different people that have a different view, and the question here is, what's the evidence? And there seems to the best of my awareness, which may be too limited here, we may get generate some correspondence here from somebody that has some information that's eluded us. But I don't know of a year that we can competently designate as a Jubilee Year, because part of the problem was they didn't observe it. That's why they went into the 70 years captivity.
Right.
You check it in First Chronicle, it's 36. So anyway, I think it's a very legitimate question, but I'll just demur because I don't have any concrete evidence to add to the discussion.
Yeah.
I'm aware of substantial controversies about two parts: the spacing. You know, are they on a 50-year cycle, or are they 49 plus? They're different. They're different grids. And I think that I personally would suspect that it's going to link to a grid of sevens. And so seven of those, the next one is a Jubilee Year, but it counts as part of the next sequence, if you will. But the real problem is, when did they observe it? When is there a Elohim sanctified date that was the Jubilee Year?
Yes.
And I have not had anything that was persuasive that I've seen.
Yes, and you've also mentioned the fact that sometimes people are using these aspects of research to really bring about divination. In other words, they're wanting to get some kind of magic formula that allows them to be able to predict the future, which we're forbidden to try to predict the future, and sometimes linking together with some of these issues like the Year of Jubilee and making them necessarily line up prophetically can get us focused on the wrong issues, I think.
Very much so, because divination, we need to keep this in mind, divination was prohibited in the Torah. The purpose of prophecy is not to predict the future. The purpose of prophecy is to foretell God's plan and glorify Him when it gets fulfilled. There's a difference there, a very fundamental difference.
Yeah.
So if something happens that fulfills prophecy, praise His name. But it's not put there with the intent of us predicting the future. That's called divination. It's prohibited.
Yes.
So many people that are indulging in biblical prophecy, at the root of their interest is a false presumption We're not there to predict the future. We are held accountable to be prepared for the troubles that are coming.
Yes. Well, here's a simple question for you, Chuck. It's from Jay. He didn't tell us where he was from, but he writes this question. If the main reason of the flood was to wipe out the Nephilim, how come they appear after the flood?
Because there's a second incursion of those. In Genesis 6, verse 4, it says, and also after that. In other words, the Nephilim that are on the earth were not limited to those that were mischievous before the flood. That's one group, obviously, and that's what led to the flood. But when you get to Numbers 13, when Moses sends the spies into the land, 10 come back with the evil report, as they call it. And they said there's Nephilim in the land. That's Numbers 13, verse 33, I believe, if I remember correctly. But the point is, Satan had 4 centuries. When God announces in both Genesis 15 and Genesis 17, tells Abraham that his descendants will be away, but they'll come back after 4 centuries. Satan then knew he had 4 centuries to lay down a minefield.
Right.
And so apparently there were 4 key tribes. Now, they may be different names for the same tribe. That's another debate. But the point is, there are 4 key tribes that Joshua is told to wipe out every man, woman, and child. And when you read that as a New Testament reader, you're shocked, because that sounds like genocide to me, But clearly, Joshua had the instructions to wipe out 4 key tribes. And part of the criticism of Joshua is he didn't complete the job. And there's 4 places that he failed to do that. And those 4 places were Bashan, which is called today the Golan. It's the area of Samaria, which we call the West Bank, and Gaza. It's interesting to discover the very places that Joshua failed to complete the mission are to this day still under dispute. And it argues in the favor of those that highlight the fact that demons seem to have territorial mandates. And Otis and some others wrote books on that. And I was skeptical at first, but I think you can show it from the scripture that, strange as it sounds, that these spirit beings have specific regions of influence. And it's interesting, the ones that were at issue in the book of Judges are still at issue to this day.
Yes, yes, certainly are. I've got a question here from Chris. He's from Australia. He's written a number of things here, but I'm going to pick two of the many questions he has. He says, I believe God has revealed things to me before I have even researched them or understood them, which I believed and was totally amazed when I checked them out. Is belief, here's the question, is belief a prerequisite for revelation, or is revelation the precursor to belief?
Well, I think the revelation is a precursor to belief with one caveat. God seems to prefer to spoon feed us. He will give us some truth, and he will give us more depending on what we do with the truth he's already given us. That's where we get these peculiar expressions the Lord gives us, he that hath, he'll get more, and he that hath not, that will be taken away that which he hath. In other words, it sounds strange at first, it sounds like double talk until you analyze what he's saying is that you will get some truth, and depending on how you deal with that will determine whether you get more or not.
Yeah.
And if you show respect for and a revelation of Christ, that's a likelihood to get a further one. And I think that's a lifetime kind of exposure. In other words, as time goes on, if you've been dedicated and you've been persistent in your study of the scripture, I think God will reward that,
right,
by giving you further insight.
Yes, absolutely. He's got one more question here, which is you've been asked this a number of times, but it's always good to repeat it, especially since you're on the other side of the Pacific Ocean from us. It says, why is Chuck in New Zealand? And is this the same reason why he wears his U.S. flag upside down on his lapel?
No, they're 2 different things. Let me answer that because there's a lot of misunderstanding. We've been on the radio here in New Zealand every day for 16 years. So we had a heart for New Zealand very early. We felt led of the Lord to locate a major headquarters there in New Zealand some years ago, long before Obama was on the horizon. Okay, so now, we've moved there because we feel called of the Lord to do that. Now that we've been there for some years, we're beginning to infer some of the reasons God may have had us set up a platform there. And it's certainly clear to us that we benefit by having a speaking platform that's offshore. My wife Nancy was one of the earliest in our family to recognize and advocate that we have a platform that's offshore, if you will. That was many years ago. And so our being in New Zealand is not a fulfillment of some kind of rebuttal. Now, the flag upside down is just a expression. In case you're not following that, flying your ensign upside down is an internationally recognized distress signal. If you have a ship or something and you run the ensign upside down, it's an indication that I'm in distress. And so I wear my American flag upside down as a way to attract attention to the fact that America's got some problems that need fixing. And when people call up my attention, hey, by the way, your flag's upside down, I say, absolutely, I'm trying to fix that. Not the flag, the country. So
right,
I use it as just a little conversation piece, but it's very, very true. I think that there are some really serious challenges. And my greatest passion is that I think the average American has no grasp of how he's being lied to, how the media is shaping his opinions contrary to truth. And we're not talking about bias here. We're talking about treasonous actions by the main press of hiding from the American people things that they're entitled to know. And in fact, desperate need to know. And the corruption in our media and our entertainment industries. And so it's just a shocker to see how it's degraded to be powerful in the hands of a few. And that the hands of a few take pride in shaping opinions rather than informing them. And the predicament that America's in was predictable long ago. People just need to pay attention. They need to realize what's going on. And unless they do something aggressive and effective to repair the leadership in this country, it's over. And the pain of what's coming is probably only understood by people who have lived in Europe and elsewhere where they've had these kinds of problems in the past, and they have a history of dealing with them. America has none. America is totally oblivious to the fact that the total debt of America is 11% larger than the total wealth of the entire planet Earth.
Wow.
And when you come to and I'm talking about the McKinsey Global people that just produced that recently. These aren't crackpots. These are the most respected management consultants on the earth. And they recognize that they estimate that the total wealth on the planet Earth is about $200 trillion. The debt, not just cash, but the accrued liabilities, the debt of the United States is 11% larger than the collective wealth of the entire planet Earth. That should tell you that something's out of whack, and that's going to have implications, not only just financial implications, but personal freedom implications, martial law implications, and fill in the blanks.
Yes, well, we've discussed before, one of the ways in which countries that find themselves in economic straits like this deal with it is you tend to forget the economic problems when war breaks out. And so that's also another indication that we could be, and we underscore the word could be in a situation to where it'd be advantageous for the United States, sadly, to get itself involved in some conflict so that it can somehow deflect the responsibility they have in terms of their debt as a country. Let's move on to another question here. This is from John. He's from Scandinavia. He writes this: I've been looking into Deuteronomy chapter 2, Jeremiah chapters 48 and 49. He says, it is obvious that God gave parts of the land surrounding Israel to the Moabites and the Ammonites. It even clearly states that God in Jeremiah chapter 48 and 49 has plans to turn to these two people's destinies, that they will be resettled or reestablished after they have been judged by God. I think it's really fascinating that God makes a major point for Moses that the Israelites do not even have to reflect on attacking the Moabites or the Ammonites because God has given them some land of their own. How does this play into the millennium or Israel's expansion?
Well, one of the things you need to notice that's who's missing in that list is Edomites. The Edomites, when you get to Ezekiel 25 through 32, there are 7 major groups that are singled out for judgment. And the ones that the most severe, strangely, are the Edomites. And they have a dark chapter indeed. That gets into a whole study that we don't have time to give us a few sound bites on, but you need to do some homework and discover who the Edomites really are. To do that, you need to track their movement from being southeast of the Dead Sea around to the southwest side, where they had a country of their own called Idumea, which is just a Greek alliteration of Edomites. But they're the ones that cheered the Babylonians on when they took Judah captive. And their history subsequently, under John Hyrcanus, under the Maccabean days, where they forced the Edomites to become Jews, or at least appear that they were, very dark days. And so that starts to complicate who is the Edomite today. And that's a fairly complex study that I leave to you to dig into and come to your own conclusions. But I think that's a very key issue, because I think you'll discover that it has a huge impact on your perspective of the Palestinian predicament, if you will. Right,
okay, very good. Here's a question from James. He writes, where is Gog mentioned in the Septuagint in the Minor Prophets as the demon king of the locusts?
You'll find that in Amos chapter 7, the first 4 verses there. God tells Amos he's going to do certain things, and Amos talks him out of it, sort of. But in Amos chapter 7, verse 1, there is, in the Septuagint, there's it's a very subtle thing in translation, but it's the Septuagint that really nails it down, that Gog is a title of the king of the locusts. Now, the word locust is used as a metaphor. How do I know that? Because Proverbs 30, verse 27 tells you that the locusts have no king. Now, it's talking about natural locusts. So when you see locusts that have a king, like in Revelation 9, you know that's a metaphor for some kind of demon creature. And we have he's even named in Revelation 9, Apollyon and destruction, so forth. You find the allusion. It's very unusual in, for example, in Ezekiel 38, 8 and 39, for somebody as important as Gog to show up in the text without some kind of prior allusion. Well, there is a prior allusion in Amos 7:1 where Gog is there designated as the king of the locusts, or to put it more precisely, one of the top lieutenants, if you will, of Satan's horde. So I'm not suggesting he is Satan. I'm not suggesting that he's necessarily the Antichrist, but he clearly is a demonic leader of some kind in the events of Ezekiel 38, and the identity is provided to us from Amos 7:1, but in the Septuagint.
Yes, but you also see the appearance of Gog after the millennial reign of Christ. You see this representation of Gog there also. That helps explain,
by the way. Gog and Magog occurs twice. There's the event of Ezekiel 38 and 39, which clearly occurs prior to the second coming of Christ. But then you encounter it again in Revelation 20, where clearly that's after that original return of Christ. So the fact that it's Magog, that's a people, we can understand that. The fact that Gog is a title of a leader helps explain that.
Right. Okay, yes. Here's a question from, let's see, it's just a user named If Lord Willing. He writes this question and says, my question is with regards to Paul. Paul was starting churches and obviously, as such, bringing new believers into the risk of Roman persecution. And yet he did not have a message of prepping. The same can be said, I guess, of an argument of the pre-tribulation rapture as Paul operated on the doctrine of imminence. So my question is, given Paul's example in the first century, should we as Christians be concerning ourselves with prepping for the end times physically?
Absolutely, in a sense. Now, let me explain what I mean by that. I think his letters to his pastors, several of them, prepare them for what's coming. He warned them that perilous times are coming. And he wrote 3 epistles amplifying Habakkuk 2, verse 4. In other words, the just shall live by faith. He gives us the ground rules, the posture with which to endure these changes that are coming. He didn't take up arms against Rome and its abuses. He rather had his people just prepare themselves for the hardship so that they would endure. And he didn't give them a mission statement to rid them of the abuses of Rome. He gave them a mission statement to declare the reality of who he is. Our mission statement is to make the person of Jesus Christ known. But to do that, we need to know who he really is. And it's disturbing to realize how many people are misinformed in some way about Jesus, the Messiah. And that he's not a concept. He's not a wonderful teacher. He's not a guy that happened to do some miracles. No. He's the God incarnate, the creator that built this place in the first place. And he entered it with a mission to provide a remedy for us. And it's the declaration of that mission that is the gospel. The gospel is not taking up arms against same-sex marriages or taking up, not that those aren't valid causes, especially for a democracy, presumably. But that's not the calling we have. Our calling is to declare the gospel. And that gospel is defined in the first 4 verses of 1 Corinthians 15. Right. And it's that Christ died for our sins according to scriptures, that he was buried, he rose again the 3rd day. That's the gospel. And the shocking thing is to realize how rare it is to hear that old-fashioned statement preached today. And it's old-fashioned, it's not new, it's not people. It's amazing that many churches are guilty of not teaching the gospel of Christ. Right. They're doing a lot of worthwhile things, perhaps, but not that they aren't necessarily consistent with the mandate that he gave us. And I think he is very serious about the mandate he gave us. And that's why we really are taking warmth with what we call the spiritual entrepreneur. What I mean by that is someone who's operating with a measure of independence. Paul did. When Paul was with the Corinthians or when he was the Thessalonians, he never took a penny from them. He was able, by his vocational skills and whatever, to provide himself, make himself free of charge to them. And he doesn't disparage a minister getting substance from the people he's ministering to. But Paul made the point that he didn't. And we need to understand what his peculiar role that I like to call a spiritual entrepreneur. He presented his financial independence as one of the credentials he put on the table when he shows up. And there are a few exceptions to that, but he took donations for other churches, not for himself.
Well, I think it's also significant. You mentioned the Habakkuk 2:4 reference. That the context of that, of course, is Habakkuk is delivering this horrible message that the nation of Israel is going to be judged by this foreign army that's going to come in and devastate the promised land. And so it wasn't a promise of peace and prosperity that the just shall live by faith, as if somehow that the style of living would be somehow peaceful. In fact, it's against the backdrop of the fact there will be turmoil. And so it's perfectly appropriate, even within the context in which we look at it today, how much more it's important for us to remain in a state of mind where we live by faith and not look and be shaken terribly by the events taking place in the world.
It might be worth us to recap that for someone that may be new to this idea. Paul wrote 3 epistles. Habakkuk chapter 2 verse 4 says, "The just shall live by faith." Who are the just? Paul writes the epistle of the epistle of the Romans to define justification. It's the most eloquent piece of writing ever written on the planet Earth, having to do with this problem of sin and how we deal with it. And the book of Romans, and in Romans chapter 1, verse 17, Paul quotes Habakkuk 2:4 and builds that epistle on that very theme. Who are the just? Then he goes to the Galatians. In chapter 3, he again quotes Habakkuk 2:4. How shall they live? And by faith and not works is the main theme there. But finally, they shall live by faith. And he writes the epistle to the Hebrews. And in chapter 10, verse 38, just before the famous faith chapter we call Hebrews 11, yep. He defines it. So he wrote 3 epistles that are a trilogy amplifying Habakkuk 2:4. And and he so declares it all the way through because he quotes them and builds that case. So what I'm getting at is that is so important for us today, because I believe Paul's amplification of the Lord's marching orders to us is Habakkuk 2:4. And we have 3 epistles to amplify that we can get our arms around it and begin to apply it to our lives.
Yes, absolutely right. And I think that's the foundation upon which we need to keep refocusing our attention on as things do become more uncertain around us, and that is that the just shall live by faith is where needs to be our daily reminder of how we're to respond to the unsettling times in which we currently are in and will be plunged into even more in the future. So, and getting Paul's expanded version of what that means in Romans, Galatians, and Hebrews, of course, are absolutely essential, I think, for us to be able to be productive in these difficult times. Let me move on to another question. This is from Craig. He writes from Derby in England. He says, how can we be in the end times if we are only in the creation year of 5774 and the millennium reign doesn't begin until 6000? Could we be awaiting a time when Israel has all the land promised to Abraham before we can consider ourselves in the end times? What's your comments?
Well, first of all, let's not get carried away with that Jewish nomenclature. They date the years, and they did it in good faith of what they believed was correct. But I believe that there's if nothing else, there's a 490-year error in it because of a misunderstanding of something in Daniel. So whether that's accurate or not is another problematic issue. So I wouldn't hang too many hats on the way that the Jewish calendar happens to annotate the years per se, because it also has some scholastic paradoxes hidden behind it. But the real issue is, again, this idea of 6,000 years plus the one is a very popular model, even earlier back in the days of Augustine and Jerome's commentary and so forth. So it's a popular theme, but I wouldn't hang any hats on it in terms of its precision, because first of all, I'm not sure we know the calibration of the chronology that we're dealing with there. So that isn't very helpful, I realize, but I wouldn't. Let's try to separate what we know is really true from the scripture on the one hand, and separate that from traditions. And some of those traditions may be useful, some of these may be misleading, but let's separate traditions and not treat them as if they're inspired. Yes. Or God-breathed.
Yeah, that's very important truth. That's it. I've got another one that's a similar vein of that. It's from Dave. He says, the number 40 seems to be used in the Bible as a period of time for preparation, testing, purification, etc. Why is the number 40 used, and are there any more applications for this number?
Well, the way you find that out is to do exactly what you've been doing. When we say that 5 is the number of grace, or 7 is the number of completion, or 8 is the number of new beginning, what we're doing is nothing more than trying to summarize our observations of the occurrence of that number. So what you're doing when you just look at all the places the word 40 shows up, and then try to come with a hypothesis as what that seems to suggest. And you're doing the right thing to do it. There's nothing sacred about that number that we have clear teaching on, other than the way the Holy Spirit uses it in the text. That's how we know that 7 is not a divine number, because Satan has 7 of this and 7 of that. It's a complete. The word 7 seems to imply completeness. And that's why the number 8 seems to be the beginning of a new series, a new beginning, if you will. But that's an inference we draw from just simply looking at the way it's used in the text. And so that's how, when you get to numbers like 10 and 40, it gets a little more problematical, because you can find apparent uses of that may not fit a particular hypothesis. Fine. Search further, and your hypothesis is as valid as it summarizes. And it's as invalid as you find exceptions. Or if you find exceptions, that may be a highlight of special use of it. Who knows? So you're doing the right thing, though, to pursue exactly the way you're doing it.
Right. Okay. This is from Quentin in Bristol, Tennessee. It's a long question, so give me a moment. It says, having spent 9 months teaching on the Antichrist and the many possibilities, including Wally Shabbat's idea that John copied down what he saw in Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, where instead of a number, he's writing in the name of Allah. I also found that the black flag of ISIS now flies, the jihad flag, is called the banner of the eagle. Could this also be a possibility for explaining Matthew chapter 24, verse 28, which reads, wherever the carcass is, there the eagles will be gathered together. The carcass mentioned in Matthew 24 could be the indwelt body of the Antichrist, and the eagles could be the gathering jihad troops. What are your opinions?
I differ slightly. First of all, it's interesting that the eagle has traditionally been the emblem of Israel's enemies. That was the symbol for Herod. That was symbol of the double eagle for the Byzantine Empire, because they had two eagles, a double-headed eagle. That's been the symbol of Russia. It's also been a symbol of the United States, so let's not lose sight of that.
Yeah.
But so much for that. The issue of that peculiar phrase that we all wonder about, that you mentioned, Matthew. Eagles are not predators. They're predators. They're not scavengers. So the idea of eagles around a dead body is a mixed metaphor in the first place. But secondly, the idea is that these vultures are around a body is the image that we tend to draw when we hear that what apparently was a commonly used proverb of some kind. I have canvassed most of the guys that I respect scholastically about what that means, and the synthesis of that survey that I read is that no one really has a convincing answer as to what that is referring to. People have some speculations, but it's a puzzlement. One of the things it could be, it sounds strange at first, but it may be that the eagles gather where the body is. It may be an allusion strangely enough, to the rapture. But that's highly speculative. Alternative views are no more convincing. I have yet to see anyone that has really given me a persuasive argument as to what that is really referring to. It was obvious. It's some kind of proverb that leaves us to speculate on what was really being alluded to, and I would welcome, new insights on that. The ones I pursued have been unfruitful.
Right. No, it's always a conundrum, that's for sure. It's a puzzle.
But I want to highlight the fact that when I don't know, I'll say so.
Yes, that's right. Oh, I thought you were supposed to know it all. Before we close off, Chuck, I want to ask you a couple of questions. You have a conference coming up. You're in the States now, but you have a conference coming up the end of October, Strategic Perspectives Conference. Tell our audience a little bit about what's going to be coming up at the end of October.
I think it's our 10th one, isn't it?
Yes.
I think so. This conference that we do every year in Coeur d'Alene, typically at the end of October, has got a reputation that is second to few. So you can make some inquiries and confirm that if you like, but it is for us the conference of the year. And we typically have 8 or so major nationally known names of people that have a specific burden that fits the times. There are a few that are regulars, but most of them we rotate through the people that we enjoy the most or respect the most on the Christian platforms. And so we have a lineup here that we regard as phenomenal. Tom Horn is a legend in his own right, having done some major milestone books in the last year or two that have put him on the headlines, as you may know. Bill Salas is one of the first to highlight the Ezekiel 30, the Psalm 83 thing. Eli Mazzulli has made a track record of his own with the Nephilim skeletons that he found in Peru and all that. Joseph Farah, head of WorldNet Daily, is one of my heroes. That doesn't mean I always agree with what he comes up with, but boy, there's a guy that's devoted his life to the real concept of the free press and as a watchdog on the government. And He does so at great personal peril, and we always cherish having him in our midst to express some of his insights from Washington. And the lineup goes on. It's probably the conference of what we will participate in the year, and so one of the things is my biggest challenge at the moment is to try to fine tune the kind of posture I'm going to have to take when I face that audience, because in my mind it's one of the most sophisticated audiences that we address anytime, and it's a heavy burden to try to come to them with insights and perceptions that are fresh and new and different. So it's a challenge, if you may. So, but if not only I encourage you to attend if you can. I wouldn't be surprised if the seats are sold out. The real thing you can do is you can attend electronically by watching the issues that are being discussed on the internet, and you can do that individually when you have a church that has would have an interest in putting up a large screen and participating in the conference. That especially on that Saturday, it could be an incredibly rewarding experience. And if you have anyone, you contact Ron, can give you the details on how to set that up. But I would encourage you to participate with us in that conference, because I think it's going to be talked about. There's also 3 brand new books that are going to be introduced virtually at that time. Bob Kernook's book on the temple is already creating major shockwaves throughout the community, the Christian and Jewish communities. And he's getting incredibly, despite the astonishing implications of that book, he's getting first-class top scholarship endorsements of it. So that's quite a controversy. It's boiling in its own right. There's also my wife's book, Hope Against Hope, is being prayed over. The Nan's predicament been prayed over. There are literally thousands of people around the world praying for her, and her very candid and transparent discussion of that very difficult area is well documented in the book that it's just coming off the press here shortly. And then William Welch and I did the cheekiest kind of book you could imagine. It's I, Jesus, an autobiography. And we tried to correct the misunderstandings about Jesus Christ by his own words, the claims that he made and so forth, both in his words that he spoke, as recorded in the scripture, and also on the 7 letters that he dictated that are often overlooked for insights. They're probably the most profound documents to really study carefully. So the book I, Jesus, an autobiography, is coming off the press, and there's indications that it's going to be a major source of discussion. So between The Temple by Bob Kernook, the Hope Against Hope by my wife Nancy, and William Welty and myself on the I, Jesus, there'll be a lot of discussions about that, and there may be some other things coming that I've missed. It's October is going to be a pivotal time for all of us. Yes.
Well, Chuck, thank you very much, and we hope that you can quickly get over the jet lag that you'll experience, having just traveled arrived early this morning from New Zealand there in the States. And so, Lord willing, we'll have this discussion again our next Wednesday, your Tuesday night. And so that means that I'm from tomorrow, you're still from the Tuesday. And so God bless you and watch over you, and we'll see you in a week. And for those of you watching, again, just to reinforce what Chuck said, we will have the conference coming up in October. If you're interested in seeing that, you can book that online here at kitrust.org. If you want to book as a group, just let us know, and there's a different charge and capability that will be available to you if you wanted to stream to a larger venue. So in either case, contact us through the kitrust.org site, and we can respond to you. You certainly don't want to miss the sessions that are going to be presented at this conference. And so with that, may God bless you as you continue to study His Word and as you watch for His soon return. May God bless you.